bent. Janssen! And Blackburn Rovers are 18 minutes away from a Premiership return.
As far as Stewart, just outside the penalty area, clips it central for David Dunn. David Dunn equalises. It just had to be. Dax corner and it goes. Glance towards goal, and Rovers have taken the lead. And Charlie Mulgrew has scored his 14th of the season.
Yeah, so here we are live on World Mental Health Day. Simon, are you a Blackburn fan? Or you just work for the club?
Oh no, definitely. Yeah, sorry, you caught me off there. And a Gillingham fan as well. That's for my sins.
I was just wondering whether.
I love your Bradley Dack then.
I know about Bradley Dack for everybody. Just saying.
How much you enjoyed the intro there, because this is the first time you've been on a Rovers Chat show, so it might be the first time you've seen that intro. I think it's class. All of the great Rovers memories over the last few years kind of popping up in that intro that's been lovingly crafted. We are, of course, sponsored by a couple of very important companies that we do need to pop up there. And so we'll do the intros in a second. But welcome, first of all, everybody, to our It Takes Balls to Talk World Mental Health Day special. We are, of course, sponsored by 6 Yards Out. And we're also sponsored by Blue Rose Capital. And we thank those sponsors very much for their support. Otherwise, we won't be able to produce important videos that I think that we've got here. So we'll just quickly go around the panel. I'm going to start with Ruth. Ruth is the workplace wellbeing lead for Mind in Middlesbrough and Stockton. Also, very importantly, she's also my wife. Hi.
Hi.
Nice to see you today. I've been at work most of the day, so it's nice to see your face. Would you want to just give us a little bit of an intro about what you get up to at Mind?
Yeah, so I'm a workplace wellbeing lead, like you said. So my role is specifically in a kind of corporate setting. So I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counsellor. I tend to go in and do a lot of wellbeing work, so that proactive stuff around awareness raising, training mental health first aiders, training people into how to have those conversations around mental health, either themselves or to support other people. So the work I do is predominantly that proactive stuff, and really rewarding and really needed. So I love my job, and I'm very lucky to be able to talk about mental health regularly and get paid to do so.
Absolutely, and we're very lucky to have you on the stream, and thank you for coming on. We've got a babysitter at the moment who's trying to deal with the children who are meant to be asleep, but of course sod's law tells us that it's not going to happen. Simon, you also talk about mental health quite a lot. You are working for the BRFC Trust there as the mental wellbeing. I've got that. I had that up there perfectly. Mental wellbeing manager at BRFC Trust. That's so right. That kind of, I suppose, it explains in a nutshell what you do. But maybe just expand on that for us, just so that we are clear on your role with the trust.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a new role recently that I've kind of taken on there. I previously joined as the People Wellbeing Officer and was running a project called Premier League Inspires, which you might have seen on some of my Twitter feeds and things like that, which is a mentoring and wellbeing program that we run with 34 other clubs across the country, specifically targeted towards secondary school pupils. But the pandemic as it is has really pushed mental health to the forefront, and there's a need for that to be pushed at the trust. So it's something that I'm going to lead on. And the great news is the trust is so behind trying to do all the things that are around mental health. There's a lot of exciting stuff in the pipeline, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to see that you're at my old school as well this week with Tyree Stolen. Fantastic young man, and someone that we know has kind of mental health at the forefront of his mind as well, and maybe we'll come on to that later on. Gab, nice to see you. Your third appearance on a Rovers Chat show, so a friend of the channel, EFL pundit, host of the EFL debate. But you kind of take a more rounded view of football as a whole, which is why I wanted you on here. You think that football can play quite a strong role in helping people's mental health?
Absolutely, Andy. Yeah, funnily enough, earlier today I was watching, because it is World Mental Health Day, of course, as you can see on the screen, and Rochdale put out some really interesting content, and I'd recommend anyone to watch that. They interviewed a fan who sort of spoke about how the normality of going to watch Rochdale sort of helped them overcome their particular sort of difficulties. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. And you don't have to be having, some people obviously have major sort of depression and issues like that. Other people, you know, there are just day-to-day challenges that life can bring. And I think football plays a massive part in just sort of people just letting off a little bit of steam, seeing their friends, watching football and just going away from the day-to-day challenges for 90 minutes and getting immersed in it, and then coming back to their problems with a fresh mind. And I think that's the really important role that football plays in all this effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And although we are mindful that we are a Rovers Chat channel, and you know, football is very important to this channel and to all of us in a way. And I know that the stream is also called, you know, it takes balls to talk, but it's not just a male issue, it's not just a female issue, it's for everybody. We are going to obviously concentrate probably a little bit more on men's mental health and young men's mental health, because that is something that has come into the limelight, Ruth, recently, and also over the last few years. I know it's not the theme of this year's World Mental Health Day, but it was, I think, 2 years ago, young men's suicide prevention. So it is something that we are thinking about and probably going to talk about in this stream. So I just wanted to say right at the top of the show that we are going to be talking about topics that may be sensitive or upsetting. So if you find yourself being triggered by anything we talk about, we do have signposting, and we are going to post some things out for support, that you know where to go. And just look after yourself, basically. If you feel like this is something that you don't want to listen to or take part in and talk about, then, you know, just look after yourself and make sure that you're okay. But Ruth, it is something that you will come across quite a lot in your day-to-day role. What is the situation, as we best understand it, with mental health in the UK, especially for young men at the moment?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really important for me, you know, with my mind hat on, to say straight off the bat, you know, we all have mental health, we all have physical health. And I think that's something that, you know, when you start from that kind of baseline of mental health is something that we all have. We don't all have mental health problems. We don't all have mental health conditions, but we all have mental health. And we talk about that as being a spectrum where we have mentally well at one end and mentally unwell. So we're all on that spectrum. And I think what we've definitely seen, and what we see in our professional role, but probably most of us know anecdotally, that over the past 18 months, 2 years, our position on that spectrum, which is always dynamic and always moving in everyday life, has been adversely affected. So all of us have had our, you know, spectrum shifted in the past 18 months for various reasons. That could be relationships, finance, health, lots of different reasons. What we do see is that potentially men don't necessarily have the same coping strategies or the same outlets to get support that women do. So often they will wait until they're quite far along that spectrum before they will actually speak out or ask for support, because of stereotyping. So, we probably do kind of try to shrug it off a little bit, but there is that kind of like, man up, grow a pair, get on with it. Just that we don't talk, we don't ask how we're doing. And actually what we're seeing now is, if anything, the pandemic has given people, men who maybe normally would have got together at a footy match or down the pub, they're maybe now in a WhatsApp chat where they are saying like, how are you doing, mate? How are things going? And actually it's really giving people that chance to say, actually, I'm not doing very well. So we do know that more people are coming forward and saying that they're struggling. That doesn't necessarily mean that more people are struggling, although they may be, but maybe just previously they didn't have that outlet to say that they were struggling, whereas now that's kind of being offered to them. Oh, Andy, we can't hear you.
It would help if I actually unmuted myself before trying to talk. Stephen was just saying in the comments here that there's a thing down Witten at the moment where he goes down for mental health, and that's important, Simon. And you must see kind of in your role, a lot of young men struggling at the moment with their mental health. Is that where we are now still with you? You still see some people struggling?
Yeah, definitely, and not just young men. Young women, men, women, young, old, everything. It's I think what Ruth was saying is very pertinent about mental health. That with us all having mental health, that was one of the things that was a very key message for me in the first part of the program that we started delivering, was that we still do this. I was privileged enough to teach at Whitman recently and explain to young people that we all have mental health, and actually it's good mental health includes struggling, negative emotions. So when you think about it, we all struggle. I think one thing is apparent is that more people are becoming willing to speak up now, which I think is fantastic. I read a stat, I think it was the American Psychological Society or something like that, said something like 62% of Generation millennials, I beg your pardon, were more willing to talk about their mental health issues than baby boomers, which is like about half that number. And then working with young people now, it's very apparent that they're much more willing to talk, much more open, which can only be a good thing going forward. But I think the key is that we need to be able to help young people have the strategies to actually cope, to manage their mental health, and that's the key bit for me, really. It's making sure that well-being side is protected.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely come on to, this isn't just going to be talking about the general mental health stuff that we are going to cover as well, but we are going to be specific in terms of giving hopefully some good strategies out to people suffering with poor mental health, and also those who maybe want to help with it as well. So I think that's important. Gab, as obviously someone who works in football, can you maybe provide a couple of examples from your life and work in the game that kind of stand out to you, where mental health, either good or bad, and the spectrum that Ruth mentioned, kind of come into play, and what you've seen in your time so far?
I think what stands out to me, Andy, is I think one of my strong beliefs about the issue of mental health, and Ruth is completely right that it is a spectrum. I think so many of the world's problems would be solved if everyone had provided therapy for a week, not for a whole week, for once a week. Sorry, that would be a long therapy session, wouldn't it? But like for an hour a week or something, if it was government provided. Because listen, we talk about sort of the NHS, and the NHS does an incredibly job with the constant cuts and things like that. And I think we need to start putting the same amount of focus into mental health, because that is the solution to a lot of the problems in the world that we're facing. A lot of bad decisions generally come as a result of people feeling angry or feeling hurt, or one of those emotions that are similar to that, and not quite knowing how to deal with it. So I think that's a really important thing for me, placing mental health as just as important as physical health. Unfortunately, under the current leadership of the country, I'm not sure we'll necessarily have that anytime soon, but I think it's something we should aspire to.
I remember writing an article actually recently about this spectrum of physical health and then mental health, because there was I write tennis as well as about football, and Naomi Osaka, obviously famously, has had an interesting year with the way that she's dealing with her mental health and physical health, and actually withdrawing from tournaments as a result of mental health. And should that be treated as different to physical health? And I think we're all here to say, obviously mental health is just as important to look after as physical health, and should be seen as such. Let's move on a little bit to kind of, we know what we want. We want everyone to improve their mental health and have positive mental health as much as possible. Obviously, it's not going to be the case that everyone has that all the time, as it is with physical health. So it's a question of how can we get there? How can we move this forwards and, improve the situation? And Simon, I'm going to come to you first, if that's all right. What's being done then within the trust about, what do we have in place for people who need this support?
Well, I think it's growing already quite substantially. I think the key is that we were talking earlier on about the distinction between mental well-being and like needing clinical medical support. Nobody here is going to try and pretend to be a master's in psychology. Well, I don't know. Actually, you guys might be masters in psychology. I might jump the gun there, but we're focusing on that well-being aspect with mainly around connecting people at the club. So we have many initiatives at the club. Obviously my role in Spires is quite specific with mentoring, but then we have things like Andy's Man Club on a Monday at 7 o'clock at Ewood Park, which is fantastic. I still can't quite explain the brilliance of the formula they use, but it is so empowering and it's so relaxed and it's so meaningful. It's well worth a look at if people haven't been down there, and it's you can just stroll up anyway. But we have things like men in sheds, and remember the Rovers, and fit fans, and all these different projects that are designed to connect people through the club, and it's that connectivity that we feel very strongly about, that we've got that aspect in the community, that everybody recognizes the badge, and hopefully some good facilities for people to come down and actually enjoy connecting through. And of course, we're always keen for more ideas. And in my role, I'm really keen to sort of connect with the fans as well, and see if there's more initiatives that we can put together. Because that's what we hope to be as a community club, really.
And it's good to see some fans in the comments here, but please do chip in with anything. And obviously Simon says any ideas are good, worth talking about, and ideas that come into this chat will go directly to Simon, obviously, and then into the trust and into the club itself. So anything that you guys can think of in the comments, please, do get involved. We had Dizzy, a good supporter of Rovers Chat, Dizzy Thumbs. He says, as a disability support worker for young boys with autism, he finds gaming addiction one of the biggest problems. The lack of a father at home is a big factor also. And no worries. We're happy to always support things like this. And Ruth, do you see, obviously Dizzy Thumbs has put gaming addiction there, lack of a father. Are these sort of things that you see, quite a bit in your work, and what can we do about, being able to support those people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, we all have protective factors and risk factors. So we all have things that are going to make us well, the kind of things that Simon was talking about. So connecting with other people, doing physical activity. But things that we do see are, things around sort of familial situations being risk factors for people. So money, and I know Andy, you and I have spoken about this, about the impact of, financial hardship on people. And that is something obviously that, in the kind of areas that we live and work, is an issue in terms of deprivation, poverty, loss of industry, broken homes, health concerns like poor healthcare. All of these things can be issues in terms of being risk factors for poor mental health. But I think also as well, things like gaming, gambling, use of alcohol or substances are often used as coping strategies, especially by males, because they don't necessarily have the other outlets to get support unless they're using the fantastic opportunities that they're getting through the trust. So actually then that becomes kind of a very bad coping strategy, because they're using that to kind of make themselves feel better. But as we know, these things are inevitably going to make you feel worse as you kind of get into that negative cycle. So it is something that we see, and it can be very difficult to break in terms of moving away from those risk factors or struggling with those issues in terms of getting support for your mental health. Absolutely.
And do you think the football community can do more, Gab? Like, obviously, you're here representing that kind of side of it. And we know that things, I think, are improving, but is there more that people, within the football community can do to, move this conversation forward even further?
I think certainly being available and being there, because I think understanding, on the one hand you want to be there for people, but on the other hand you can't sort of push something or force somebody else to do something that they don't want to. And I think respecting the autonomy of other people and saying I'm here if you need me is quite an important thing. I've had situations where, and I think a lot of for a lot of people in the modern era, Twitter if people are going through a really sort of difficult time where they're maybe struggling a little bit, where I would say 10, 20 years ago, writing a diary would be quite a common thing. It feels like Twitter is almost like the modern diary to an extent. And I think people, to an extent, kind of just if they have that feeling of helplessness, sometimes they do put something out on Twitter. And from my point of view, I always feel like I have some responsibility to sort of see and ask if they're okay. Sometimes they have taken up that sort of window to talk a little bit. I think what I would say though is that there's been times, and I'm not saying this to sort of big myself up by any means at all, but there have been periods when I've offered a number if they're in serious difficulty. That's just because that's a way of hopefully giving them an opportunity and a sort of outlet. But I think there's been sort of an apprehension sometimes because there's sometimes that feeling of shame, and I think that as a collective we maybe have to address that, because shame is a very sort of powerful emotion and a very negative emotion as well that can be very destructive, and I think it's about combating that the best way we can.
Yeah, we're going to change tack slightly and ask some more personal questions. Again, as I said at the top of the show, if anyone does feel triggered by things that are said in this next section, then just look after yourselves and make sure that you're okay. But Simon, you mentioned just briefly before we started recording here that you've probably been through some tough times and that you wouldn't mind sharing some of those. And how did that manifest itself with you? And do you feel like you struggled to find the right avenues to deal with what you were going through at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in my previous career, I was a chartered tax accountant a while back, and I think when I was working for it was a company called Deloitte, and I think I learned some probably bad habits in there about ways in which I should probably manage some of my issues or maybe bury some of my issues. And then I went into teaching and loved it. I was teaching for many, many years, and I think I struggled heavily with my own mental health. I've always struggled with quite severe anxiety and being switched on all the time. And I think the difficulty for me was around the stigma. People would see me as what was Mr. Wotton, he's fine, everything's great, grand, he was smiling away, everything was grand. But in that situation, you don't want to put out and go, actually, I'm really struggling, because to other people, you're trying to be that strong individual. And I think the thing about strength and understanding that strength is absolutely nothing to do with mental health. In fact, it's much stronger to speak out and say you're struggling than it is to like I've heard a lot of people, I think it was Ruth saying earlier on, saying man up and things like that. It's not a fair reflection of where you are. In fact, it takes a great deal of strength to speak out, and I held on for probably 10-12 years, and it affected me very, very badly, and it ended up meaning that I ended up leaving the career that I was enjoying very, very much. But maybe things happen for a reason. Maybe that's why I'm here at Rovers now. But I think the big thing was not being able to speak out. And as Gab said just a minute ago, it was the shame. It was like, how can people look at me and think, he's not coping very well? And I think, I got to a very, very dark ebb in my life, and it was a case of not for some wonderful family. I've got an amazing wife, some amazing friends that stuck out for me and insisted that I went off and saw a GP who was amazing, went way above and beyond that, what would have been expected in the role. And I think if it hadn't been for those people, I probably wouldn't be in a situation to tell this story today. So knowing where I've been with that, and knowing how vital it is that we give opportunities for people to speak out without thinking that they're doing something wrong or in shame, will be my driving force in what I'm doing at the Trust now. And if we can help even one person say, actually, do you know what, it's absolutely fine to struggle, and there's a bit of light there, then that's worth the while.
Teaching, amazing wife, this is all ringing a bell for me.
Very smooth.
We were both
very smooth.
we were both teachers, and you must recognize some of those things that Simon's saying there. Good for Simon that he went to go and see his GP, and that's often a very important first step. Is that something that you would advise to people going through something similar? And maybe if you give us something of your own personal experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, so I have lived experience of mental health as well, from, again, it being in teaching and kind of the unwritten expectations of we're all stressed around here. And I think, especially the work I do in workplaces, sometimes there's that culture. We talk a lot about culture around mental health. And I think it was Ollie mentioned there about that stigma, about your feelings are valid. And I think sometimes we have that comparison culture. If you go into work and say, I'm tired, someone else likes to tell you how much more tired they are than you, for example. Or we might feel ourselves, oh, I feel depressed, but I'm not as depressed as X. I'm not having intrusive thoughts. I can get out of bed, I can go to work. Therefore, it's not worth me ringing a doctor. They don't feel like they deserve help. And so actually, it's really easy for us to say, speak up, ask for help. But often when we're in that situation, we can't see ourselves how far along that spectrum, to go back to that analogy, how far we are along that. And it can be really hard to advocate for ourselves, because of our gender, because of our background, because of our cultural identity. Actually, it's not always easy to put your hand up and ring a doctor or ring Samaritans, or speak to even a close family member or friend, depending on what you do have around you. And actually, that's why, yes, it is important. And absolutely, if you feel like you ring a GP or ring the Samaritans, absolutely brilliant. That's a great start, and you will never be judged, and that help is there. But if the first step for you is to just go on like the Mind website, or find a peer support network on Facebook, or go down to an organized event and just speak to somebody that you don't know, often it's easier to speak to a stranger than it is to speak to a friend. I think the beauty, and I think we spoke about this, is about, Gab mentioned about it should always be done with autonomy and respect. So it's not about us saying someone, ring a doctor, here, I've rang Samaritans, and put them on the phone. It's absolutely about what is right for that person at that time. And if all they need right there and then is to go on a website and have a look at it, or to, type in a chat here, or to tweet somebody, then actually that might be genuinely all that they can manage at that time in terms of their recovery journey. So yeah, like, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but there isn't one piece of advice or a one size fits all. And for me, the other thing to mention, I might be jumping the gun a little bit, is also, actually, it's not just about us speaking up for ourselves when we're struggling. It's about spotting when the people around us are struggling and asking that question, and asking them twice.
Yeah, so I wanted to get onto that now. Just as
Beautifully
an
segued
aside,
in.
yeah, Ollie, thank you for your comments, and you do great work with Rovers Chat. I know that you've had incidences, Ollie, where people have come to you whilst on live on Rovers Chat, and people have said to you about their own mental health, and it's great work that you've done in the past. But Gab, a word of encouragement for you there as well.
Yeah,
He says
that wasn't what. It's not about me or whether anyone's offering numbers. It's about us collectively tackling a very important issue.
Absolutely, and let's get into that, tackling that important issue. Ruth, you started to go on to it there about how Gab's offering himself up. I've offered myself on Twitter and through Rovers Chat that people can reach out to me, but I know that if someone did reach out to me and said, "Look, I'm really struggling with my mental health. It's pretty serious," I really wouldn't actually know really what to say. So how can we? And it might be even worse if you have to try and open that conversation yourself, but you see the signs. There's some worrying signs in one of your family members or your friend, or even a stranger, someone that you don't know, someone you might see down the Rovers or whatever. How do you then open that conversation, and how should that conversation kind of go on?
Well, I think it's interesting phrasing it. I think, how do is it you that opens up that conversation? I think it's you that gives the conversation a chance to be opened, but I don't know if it's necessarily you that opens the conversation, because I do believe that you've got to give the other person the space that they need to open up in the way that feels comfortable to them. I'm quite fortunate, I suppose, in the sense that my mum has quite a big sort of career, I suppose, in child psychotherapy, and the similar sorts of issues. And I suppose I've grown up with sort of conversations about what makes people tick and how people's minds work. And I suppose I'm quite lucky in the sense that I've got that kind of sensitivity, whereas I suppose for a lot of people there hasn't been that sort of culture, I suppose, and therefore maybe it is a little bit more difficult to open up or to have a bigger conversation besides the more service level things. But I think in answer to your question, it's really just kind of if somebody gives you a lead, just giving them the opportunity to explore it further. But I don't think you don't necessarily grab on the lead. You just sort of encourage them to say more if they want to.
And Ruth, obviously, you tend to work next door in the other room, and I've heard you have this kind of approach this with managers in workplaces, and I just wondered whether you would give us the benefit of that similar sort of talk, and maybe give us some of the kind of feedback and bite back that you sometimes get, and how to combat that as well.
Yeah, I mean, my first thing that I always say to anyone that I'm speaking to or training is, how would you want to be treated if you were struggling and somebody spotted you were struggling? How would you want to be treated? You would want that person to approach you non-judgmentally. You would want to be treated with dignity, with respect, with authenticity. And ultimately, that's all anybody wants from you. But you're absolutely right. When the shoe's on the other foot and we're the person doing the asking or being on the other side of that conversation, we do that swan thing where we might be serene on the surface, but we're paddling furiously underneath when somebody does say, actually, yeah, I am struggling. Especially, if we've had to ask that question, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you thinking of taking your own life? And then they say, yes, I am. Actually, it's like, crikey, what do I do with this now? But I think the main piece of advice we always give it is, you aren't there to be a mental health expert. You're not there to be a doctor, to be a psychotherapist, to counsel anybody. You are there to be a facilitator and a support, to get someone help. So we always think of it as being a first aider, not a surgeon. You're there to notice somebody is distressed and to get them to the support, to the right person, to the expert. So that is asking the question, asking questions openly and non-judgmentally. So, are you okay? Blokes say that all the time. Are you all right, mate? You're all right, mate. You're all right. You okay? But they're not really asking. But so actually, if you're really worried about someone, maybe ask them again. So, are you sure you're all right? Or, I've noticed you're not yourself at the minute, or I've not seen you at football, or you seem a bit quiet. Is everything okay? How are things going? Haven't seen you for a while. Just keep it really non-judgmental, really open that conversation. Like Gab said, see where it goes. Let it come from them. Obviously, we're not going to ask any closed questions or make any judgments around that. Just to try and keep it as kind of empathic as possible and supportive, and acknowledge that. I think some of the best examples I've seen are when people have said, I don't think I'm the right person for you to be telling this to, but I'm so glad you've told me this, or like, it must have been really hard to tell somebody that you feel like that. Let's get you some help. And I think being genuine with people really does go a long way. And then, of course, you do exactly what Gab said, that sign where you can, that signposting. Have you thought about this? Probably they have. Have you thought about ringing a GP? Have you thought about ringing Mind? Have you thought about looking this up? Have you thought about speaking to your partner about it or whatever? Often it's not that simple. But sometimes that conversation with you is all they need. Actually, that's the first step, and they might come back to you then later on, just reassuring them as well as the last thing, but at the end of the conversation, that you are there for them. So, I'm really glad we've talked about this, or, I'm always here if you need a chat. And just leaving that door open is so important for people, because these things are a slow burner, and you're very unlikely to get, the full picture in that first conversation. So if you can kind of leave that door open, then, you're just being a support, and leaving that there for them is a really useful tool.
And just before I go back to Simon, when you say to people in your sessions, ask the direct question, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you thinking of taking your own life? What's the reaction to that with the people that you are training? And, is that the recommended way of dealing with that from Mind?
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking there if it's pre-watershed. Generally, the response I get from a senior manager when I say that is, F off. That isn't my job. I'm not doing that, because it's uncomfortable, because, it isn't something we want to ask. It is potentially embarrassing. We talked about that stigma, but actually we know from, and I know someone mentioned there about being a trained suicide prevention worker. Actually, all the work around suicide prevention tells us that from people who've attempted to take their own lives, or the families who've lost people to suicide, is they wanted to be asked that question directly. Don't beat around the bush, don't overplay it, don't over dramatize it, but just ask the question, mate, I'm worried about you. Have you thought of, have you been thinking about hurting yourself, or have you thought about taking your own life? Have you had suicidal thoughts? That's all it needs to be, a question, a few words. The way I think about it is, the worst reaction that you're going to get is they tell you to F off, and what are you saying that for? And actually you say, I'm really sorry if I've upset you, but I just wanted to check because I'm worried about you. That's the worst you're going to get, is egg on your face. That's the worst. But actually, on the other hand, you get someone who looks you directly in the eye, and this has happened, and said, yeah, I am. I know where, I know when, I know how. And actually, if you hadn't asked them that question, what could the outcome have been? So, in those terms, that's pretty stark terms. But in that situation, would you have rather have asked the question or not? Because then you can get that person help, and you can get them the support they need. In terms of getting them, we do believe that suicide is a preventable death if we can get the person the support they need when they're in crisis.
And talking about support that people need, Dizzy Thumbs has put this in the comments, and I think it's just a very brave thing for you to do, mate. And this is what we're here for, in a way. He's right. He writes, I don't like to admit this, but I'm a high functioning drug addict and have been for 27 years. The saying goes, the chains of habit are too weak to be felt until they are too strong to be broken. And it's really positive that you've felt comfortable to be able to put that in the comments. And if you want to speak to any of us at the end of this stream, or if you feel like you want to have more conversations around that in private, then we're absolutely here for that for you. You go on to say, Dizzy, that you are a trained suicide prevention worker, which is obviously a fantastic thing to have done. And yes, should it be taught in high school? Simon, I'm going to just, this wasn't the scheduled question for you, but you've already admitted there to being a teacher in a previous life. You obviously have the role that you have now. Do you think that this is something that should be as part of the curriculum and part of what young people learn in school?
Well, it's a bit broader than that. I mean, for me, yes, suicide prevention, it's one of those things that probably needs to be on the curriculum later along. I think we probably are a bit guilty in this country of having ignored, our PSHE curriculum, if you like, in the earlier years. I think it was a non-statutory subject for a long time, and I think without getting too much into the pressures of school curriculums and so on, that when something's not statutory, it doesn't necessarily get the same level of priority in the curriculum as it should otherwise. And I think we've probably worked around mental well-being for many years, but we haven't really taught it in the way that people look at themselves and reflect. So yes, and I mean, I was talking to my year 7 groups recently and sort of saying, when did you start PE? And they would say, oh, in reception, we remember running around trying to pretend to be newspapers and so on. But then we talk about mental health, and it might be their first specific lesson around mental health by year 7. So there's something not right. If you can't have one without the other. They need to be more specific. And I'm proud that I've got colleagues at Rovers that go in and work on their Premier League primary stars curriculum work, and a lot around mental well-being that's going on in schools now. But yes, we definitely need much more going on in schools. Young people are never underestimate young people, is what I would say, having been in schools for many years. And I think anything around this is vital. And I think the other thing as well is, generally speaking, teachers are fantastic individuals who want to support and help young people, and stuff like this with the best will in the world to Venn diagrams, and I love a Venn diagram, but this is stuff that's real life that is vital for young people, and it should be much more prioritized in the curriculum.
If
Yeah,
I can just
absolutely.
chip it, sorry, can I just chip in with a stat there? Because I know you love a stat, Andy. I know you'll
Mhm.
appreciate this. But actually, just to pick up on what Simon was saying there, that actually research shows that I think it's 58%, but definitely over 50% of mental health problems start before someone reaches the age of 15. And actually, 75% of all mental health problems are founded by the time a person is 18. So you're absolutely right, Simon. It's critical. We maybe think, oh, well, they're just kids, they don't know, how can they have had that life experience? But actually, we see that it is absolutely crucial that that is happening in high school.
Can add a stat on for you as well there, Ruth. I was looking at the Children's Commission early this year that reckons it's now 1 in 6 children will probably fulfill the criteria for a clinical mental health disorder. So we're not even just talking about people that are struggling with their mental health. We're talking about clinical diagnosable mental health disorders, 1 in 6. So, in an average classroom, you're looking at 5 children. So we're talking about a pandemic with coronavirus. There's an argument that there's a pandemic around mental health as well.
Yeah.
It's become very stats heavy, and the Venn diagrams being mentioned. It's like an episode of the stats show that I usually would present for Rovers Chat, but obviously very serious points being made here. And Stephen Mason, we're very sorry to hear that. Again, thank you for bringing that into this chat. It shows again that we've hopefully created a safer space for people to come and present these issues. And these are the things that we do want to prevent. And with some of the strategies that hopefully you've heard from Gab, Ruth and Simon, we can hopefully, reduce the number of times that we have to see someone type this. Or, I lost a very old friend of mine who lived in Blackburn, to suicide as well this year. And that hit me very hard because, I knew him as a child, as a very outgoing and very happy child. But, things change and the spectrum that Ruth started us off with at the top of the show, it's also, it oscillates, and we're at different places at different times. And even within the course of a day, you can be at one end and then the other. And it's something that's not just, I don't just always feel the same way about things. And even it could be the same stimulus, but get a different reaction. And Gab, let's talk about maybe some progress that's being made, and maybe your own perspective on your mental health.
Sure. I think I used to feel quite have a few insecurities because I felt like being in. I got diagnosed with Aspergers syndrome. I think they've changed the name for it since then. But as far as Asperger's syndrome, and I think because of that, I've got a sort of a mind where I'm quite sort of single focused, which means that in group conversations, people talk really quickly and babbling. And I found it, certainly as a kid, I found that really challenging to sort of keep up with. Because I wasn't able to kind of keep up with these various new conversations, it did kind of affect my self-esteem a little bit. Having some therapy, I had sort of session once a week with a therapist that was sort of about half an hour away from my house, and that among various things helped me a lot with my confidence, and is a massive part of why I've since been able to do what I'm doing now. And obviously it helped me when obviously unfortunately lost my dad to cancer when I was 24, which was a really difficult experience, and it certainly helped me through that. And I think there's various issues throughout life that they don't have to be sort of massive issues. And certainly my heart goes out to those who have lost friends to suicide, because that's a horrible thing to have to deal with. But I think even for more minor issues, I think therapy is something that helps, and counselling is something that helps regulate people and stay on an even keel, really.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, I'm sorry to hear about losing your father as well. I know I'll be lost without mine, and I think that's a lot of people are. So, sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Kevin Bradshaw as well, agreeing with that it should be talked about in all schools. When I was younger, this was never talked about. That kind of refers back to your boomers statement, Simon, that you mentioned earlier, and that he only became aware of it when young, due to his younger brother having mental health problems, which, obviously sorry to hear about those as well. But the fact that you Gab have mentioned going through difficulty. Ruth, you've mentioned going through difficulty. Simon, yourself, and I know I have. I've rang the Samaritans on more than one occasion, and I think it goes to show it's not that all four of us have poor mental health. It's that all four of us have been through different situations where our mental health has changed. And at the moment, I'm very glad to say that I'm in a positive mental health situation. But Ruth, like, is there a push from the mental health services and organisations to reach out? And are we seeing any positive results in that things are moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think we saw during the pandemic, we probably saw that there was a huge cash injection into charities and things like that in terms of supporting people's well-being and mental health. I'll keep my opinion to myself whether I think that's the right way to do it or where that money should be spent.
No,
But
don't keep your opinion to yourself. Come
but
on.
well, I think we all know, and we can be honest. It's very easy to sit here and say ring a GP. GPs are incredibly overstretched. They're not necessarily mental health experts. So although they might be able to again signpost you to the right support, we know that waiting lists for IAP services. So that's increasing access to psychological therapy, so counselling, CBT, EMDR. There's lots of different types of therapy that come under talking therapies, but the waiting lists are still very long for those. So actually it's very easy to say, and that's often, I'm sure we've all heard that when you say to someone, ring a GP or ring a counsellor, well, what's the point? It's an 8-week waiting list, or it's what's the point? I can't get an appointment, or I don't want to bother them. And we have that. So there's still definitely some barriers there to people actually accessing support, but certainly from the third sector, the voluntary sector, and in terms of that more kind of social support. So, Simon mentioned a lot of initiatives there, but something that we're involved in Mind and a lot of GP surgeries are involved in is something called social prescribing. So that's where you go to a GP, and rather than being signposted to, for example, counselling, you might be given 6 weeks to go and play football for free, and they'll pay for that and they'll get you there. Or gardening, they might prescribe you onto a gardening thing at an allotment. So actually thinking about those things that Simon was talking about that increase people's well-being. So I think it was it Dizzy Thumbs mentioned about forest bathing. So there's been a huge step towards kind of eco therapies and things like that, because what we've realized is, especially blokes, and we come back to that again, men don't necessarily talk face to face, they talk side by side. So that's why things like football, and I know Simon, you mentioned the power of the badge, and I used to work for a football foundation, and so I know how powerful that badge can be in getting people to engage. But actually we know that blokes are far more likely to talk in a shed or at a football game or doing an activity than sat across a therapist's desk or a GP's desk. So I think it's about, there are a lot more kind of creative ways of getting people support now that are much more suitable for example, males or people. We also know that people, for example, from LGBTQ plus backgrounds struggle to get support, from BAME backgrounds, all these acronyms. So actually it's about how these support things, it isn't just go for counselling for 6 weeks. It's actually how can we make the support fit for purpose. I think that's what we're seeing in mental health now, which can only be a good thing.
Ruth, can I just ask you a question here, because I'm quite curious about this. Do you think that dealing with sort of certain mental health issues, do you think it's more effective when you're able to speak to somebody, whether it's a counsellor or a therapist or something similar, immediately while you're going through sort of a sort of a short term sort of wave, if you like? Or do you think it can be more effective if you've actually had time to kind of process it and then you have the therapy session? Because I think sometimes I've done this, I've gone through like a really particular sort of difficult issue, and for like an hour or two it really affects me, so then I book a therapy session, but then by the time the therapy session comes, I'm in a slightly different state of mind. So on the one hand, it doesn't help you in the moment, but on the other hand, you come at it from a different perspective, I suppose.
Absolutely, and I think it's very on the individual. You strike me as someone who's incredibly self-aware and self-reflective, and that, like you say, that might, with the kind of benefit of a little bit of time, might have a slightly different benefit to you. Any good therapist, any good counselor will respond to where you are. So if you're in crisis, obviously the kind of therapy or talking that will happen will be what we would call crisis management, like you say, to get you through that situation. Whereas obviously, ultimately, what you want therapy to be, or any kind of treatment, is solution focused, recovery focused.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. I think ultimately, I know this is a cop out answer, but it's a bit of both, isn't it? Like, I think sometimes in the moment it's about ringing crisis team, or it's about ringing Samaritans and getting that immediate support, like you say, to get you through that moment. But actually, the longer term benefits in terms of your recovery journey actually come when that therapy actually maybe is slightly delayed. So sorry, that's a total cop out answer, but that is, I genuinely think that is the truth in terms of being for the individual circumstance.
Can I just say though, Ruth, I think that's absolutely spot on, because we talk about mental health as a continuum, and actually mental health does swing up and down on there. And actually what might work in terms of, do you know what, when we're talking being at crisis point and feeling that you need to go and speak to a counsellor, that's one thing, but then also developing a suite of coping strategies for yourself, things that really work for you, and even just having a cup of tea with a friend, and you know, that sort of stuff is just as valid. And it's the bit that I think there is a risk, and I don't know if you would agree with this or not, Ruth, but I feel that sometimes with mental health we've run into a bit of a spell where we're quick to over medicalize everything, and it's trying to find that you know, there are other bits that go in between it, and that's actually the stuff that will prevent more people reaching crisis point. That's the bit where we're trying to, you know, really put a big focus on.
Absolutely, and I think, sorry, Andy, we've just totally
No,
hijacked
no,
your
no,
show.
go.
But I think, Simon, you're absolutely right, and I think this is the thing. I mean, Andy will have heard me say in courses, when I'm delivering courses, like, do not Dr. Google, do not, like, not everyone's OCD reads the OCD textbook, not everyone with bipolar is the same, so do not overgeneralize, do not label, do not over medicalize. We don't need to do that. But I think what we've seen is, societally, is that we've lost those support networks. So where we would have very strong communities, where we would have, you know, when it came to, let's say, raising children or having families, very strong networks where lots of people would be involved in that, or you had very strong extended family networks. For various different reasons, people don't necessarily have those support networks. And like you said, Simon, perfectly, that actually sometimes that is the issue in itself, that we don't have anybody informally to go to, just to have that chat, just to be a bit of an emotional kind of crutch through a tough time, which we all have. And not all of us are lucky enough to have somebody that we can go to have that cuppa or that pint or whatever it is.
It's a highly personal journey, isn't it? And sometimes it takes a very personal solution to those things. So yeah, overgeneralization, over medicalization is certainly a danger, and we don't want to run down that path. So Simon, is, you know, maybe tell us a little bit more about the suite of you know, help that is available via the trust and via the club as well.
Well,
then go ahead, yeah.
Sorry, you were going to interrupt you. Go for it. I can hear my mum tell me off or her shoulder. Don't interrupt, Simon.
You were fine. I was just rambling at the end of a question. But yeah, just go ahead and tell us what help is there out there for people. I mean, Stephen's actually been very good in the comments for anyone who's in the local area. Creative Football is a good group.
Yes, it is.
Down Witten for gardening as well. And thank you, Stephen, for kind of almost providing this service in the comments for if anyone is local, and we'll definitely keep these suggestions for if anyone gets in touch with us at Rovers Chat that is local to Blackburn. But Simon, sorry, you go ahead and just kind of almost advertise yourself as
what I was going to say about Creative Football, yeah, I agree very much with Stephen there for sure. It's extremely well put together. No, I mean, you might have seen the club says and takes it very seriously. You know, our direct messages on social media are always open, and it's not sent in a flimsy way. You know, I'm lucky enough to have, you know, mental health background, first aid trade, and my DM's always open as well. I mean, we originally launched an initiative around it was February with the Time to Change movement, which we called Rovers Let's Talk. And you know, I feel very privileged to have done that, because a lot of the external stuff that people saw was great, but you know, I'm still speaking to people, you know, behind the scenes today, from I have been speaking daily with people in that gap, and a lot of it is based around just wanting that connectivity, which is fantastic. So if ever you are in that situation, I can assure that nobody here at the club is ever going to put you in a sort of an awkward position. It's non-judgmental. We're here to support you, and I think sometimes Ruth said it earlier on about when you don't know somebody, sometimes that little bit of distance can make it feel that bit safer as well. If you can excuse my terrible dad jokes every now and again, it's a place to drop through. But yeah, the Rovers Let's Talk thing continues as well, and that's one thing that I'm very grateful for. Your group at Rovers Chat as well have promoted that very heavily. It's just a nice way to connect with each other online, and I think the other thing that's really important that we can do as a club in particular is around the stigma. We were very lucky. We had my project. I had a group of pupils that were absolutely phenomenal that put together a poem with the poet, probably Tom. I can't even say it properly. Probably Tom Foolery, who did the viral lockdown poem, The Great Realization, and we had Tyrese and Daki and Armour, and we had Gemma Donnelly and Natasha Fenton and scholars like Jay Haddo, Evan Cunningham, and Joe Ferguson. Loads of people from the club wanted to get in there, and they take that very seriously. They want to get involved in helping, with our brand, to be able to go out there and say, look, this is important. Let's talk about this. Let's normalize what we're talking about, and hopefully that's something that we can continue to do through the club. But again, we're always looking for more ways to be as visible as we can do and as supportive as we can do.
Yeah, I know you are, and we were very proud to get behind that campaign in February, and I think there was a reprisal as well recently. So thank you for the work that you do, Simon. Kind of thank yous all around, really. We've come 55 minutes, and it feels like it's kind of flown over, really. But thank you to Ruth for coming on this with me and accepting the idea when I brought it to her earlier this week. She said it was a terrible idea at first, but I think
I did not. He's such a liar.
Simon, thank you for taking time out of your Sunday evening as well. But thank you again for all the work that you do as well for the Trust. And Gab, thank you so much for coming on and taking my invitation. I know I only brought it to you a couple of days ago, but I knew you'd be up for being involved. But you've brought in some really good stuff to this chat, and I can't thank you enough for coming on.
I'm really glad to help out.
So thank you as well. There's been some donations put through from Michael and from Dizzy and from Ollie as well. And rest assured, that's not money that we're going to be keeping. That's money that will go out into mental health services and charities and things like that. As Dan said in the comment there, thank you so much. We'll be passing them on. We don't really have time for any questions, but we've had all those comments during the time, and if there are any further questions after listening to this, or if you're watching it on catch up and you want to get in touch with any of us, I'm at Andy Watson Sport. Simon, do you want to give your Twitter handle out as well?
Yeah, mine is just at MWM_BRCT.
And yours is quite straightforward, Gab. But
Gab Sutton.
Gab Sutton. Ruth, you're not a really Twitterati, are you?
No, I don't tweet or whatever it is, but they can get to me. You can be my PA, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly. So if anyone does want to speak to Ruth about anything, then get in touch at Andy Watson Sport, and I'll certainly pass you on. And mind, all mind. Yeah. All of mine, National Mind, and all of the various local minds do a fantastic job, and thank you for doing that as well. Dizzy's put his number in for Ollie. Two Australians current Australians connecting in the chat there. It's good to see. Thanks, Andy Francis, someone that I've worked with in the past, a fantastic guy. And has obviously tuned in. So thank anyone else who's tuned in as well. And we'll see you all for another Rovers Chat stream. And hopefully we might make this something regular if there's call for it. So goodbye, everybody. And hopefully you have a very good time doing the rest of whatever it is. What's the 9 o'clock drama these days on BBC? Ridley Road or something like that.
Yeah, I think it is.
It's past my bedtime. I've no idea.
Yeah, well, it's probably why we're going a bit delirious here or last time. But thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.
The Rovers Chat YouTube channel is proudly sponsored by 6yardsout.com. They've got retro football from every era with mugs, phone cases and much more. They also have plenty of Rovers goods, including apparel with the famous 94-95 season and this season's kit. Check them out using the link in the description below.